Jamie Oida. I am streaming live on Twitch right now. Thank you for being here and supporting me, everybody, virtually and also in the classroom. I'm going to present my PhD dissertation research perspective on intercultural competence and flow. So, flow you might have heard of before as being in the zone. Dr. Csikszentmihalyi was one of our founding fathers of positive psychology. He also was who really founded the science of creativity. In his work, he did thousands of interviews, and what he found is that creativity occurs in this mental state of an optimal mental state called flow. So, since his research, lots of other researchers have been looking to define the components of flow in the area of arts and sports. Esports provide a really exciting area for further research. Creativity and flow have been found to have correlates with intrinsic motivation, overall happiness, and this is why video gamers, and especially even new game designers, are looking at what are these exact characteristics. How can I design a game? What are the characteristics the game needs in order to promote creativity and flow? So we have some research, as you can see, and they have found that there's a mix of a challenge, skill balance, and that I'm going to talk about when I talk about flow theory. And then there's another part, and that is social interaction. So that has caught the attention of researchers to see how that social interaction impacts flow. In our esport networks, they're very diverse. So we have some researchers that were able to find a correlation between the diversity in social networks in esports and an increased amount of flow. Those same researchers right here is Chua. Dr. Chua found that specifically that intercultural competence, so what you know about other cultures and how you're able to interact with people in other cultures, is an area for future research. Flow theory, as you can see, as I mentioned, is a dynamic between challenge and skill. So you need the right amount of challenge with the right amount of skill. Otherwise, you experience other mental states. It's based on 9 different elements. Again, I've talked a lot about this challenge-skill balance, and that's where a lot of research has really focused on until now. That it really is. But if there's low challenge and social interaction, we're noticing flow is still being experienced, which is a little different than our theory. Next slide, please. The other theory that I'm looking at is cultural intelligence. It's broken up into motivational, cognitive, metacognitive, and behavioral. So there are 4 components within that realm of competence when it comes to cultural intelligence. A little more background on the research. In esports specifically, collaborative games, so ones that involve teamwork, are showing to have potential for improving creativity and flow in the esports players. It's important to really kind of back up when we talk about flow theory to understand that this came from a discovery of creativity. And so those two are very interchangeable, and lots of research shows that the more flow, the more creativity. The more creativity, the more flow. So a lot of interchangeability between the two. Another really important area in the literature of esports has to do with ethics and also diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. The reason this is so important is because esports has provided a whole new set of ethical considerations when it comes to using technology as the platform for competition, but also how do you communicate with different types of technologies. As you can see, I'm using Twitch today as an example of different technologies that are used within the area of esports. So my problem statement is, it is not known if or to what extent intercultural competence has an effect on the variance of flow in competitive esports players. I have two variables. Variable 1 is flow, and variable 2 is intercultural competence. And that's broken down into 4 different categories. My first research question is going to look at the entire model of intercultural competence. Right? Is there an effect of intercultural competence on the variation in flow? And so what it is esport players experience flow on a constant, right? It's a level like this. So that's a variance. It's either a low to a high, and it's constantly changing. So that's a variance, right? So what really it's looking at is, does intercultural competence affect that variance in flow? Go ahead. The next 4 questions dive deep into each of the 4 different competences. So if you control for the other 3, does that one particular competence, is that what impacts and has an effect on flow? So those are the 5 different research questions. I chose a quantitative study because I am looking for a relationship between 2 variables. Also in esports, there is a requirement for hard data. Game designers want to know, what are the correlates? They are not at this point in time interested in what are the perceptions of esport players? How do they feel about flow? What does it feel like for them to interact with different cultures? Those are different questions and have a different purpose. Game designers want to know which specific elements promote flow and how can we duplicate those in video games. Again, I'm only going to touch on this being a correlational predictive study. This can be a little bit tricky to understand because I'm not looking for a direct correlation, just does this relate to this? Again, it's how does intercultural competence affect the variance of flow? And that is going to fall under the correlational predictive. There are various permissions, especially IRB, and some different other licensing that I will need. The purpose of this quantitative predictive correlational study is to determine if or to what extent intercultural competence has an effect on the variance of flow in competitive esports players across the globe. Of the 10,000 total population of professional esports players, I'm going to focus on ones that have 2 years of experience in competitive esports. I use the G-Power to come up with, and for adding attrition, I need 54 participants. With my 2 instruments, I have the dispositional flow scale, or DFS, and the cultural competence scale, CQS. Both have been validated. We have the reliability and validity of the DFS is between 0.78 and 0.92, and then the alpha for CQS is again at that 0.8 to 0.84. There's also a lot more I can talk about, but I'm not going to do it now. Each section, so each component of intercultural competence has also gone through the validation, so each of those categories have been validated. My strategy is going to be social media blast, convenience sampling in the very first. If I don't get enough from just social media, then I'll look at attending conferences or esport events where I can recruit participants. And if I still need extra participants, I'll go to snowball method to see if I can get my participants to tag some extra people on. My data collection, really before gaining IRB approval, the only thing I can do is get a quote from Mindgarden for how much the survey will cost. But besides that, it's just approvals for IRB, recruiting participants, and using Mindgarden for their resources. Mindgarden is who has the flow scale, and they allow you to customize the survey, so I can put in the intercultural competence scale as well. They store all the data, they do all the data collection. You can embed your informed consent right in there, so it's sending out one link, they go through everything, and I have all the data nicely put together for me. So this is a great resource. I'm using multiple linear regression. There are 5 different things I have to make sure that I follow, so from building the model to validating the model. I've talked a lot about the resources that I need. The ethical concerns for participants are very low because this is a very positive study. The Belmont report will also assure that the ethics are being met. My emphasis is a PhD in performance psychology, and so this is a feasible, manageable study. There are a few obvious and always challenges that might come with recruiting or streamlining data, but overall it is quite manageable.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, so we're going to do feedback first, and then we'll turn it over for questions. Dr. Schmidt?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to pick a definition. What for purposes of, and it's easily done saying, for purposes of this study, while there are numerous definitions for flow, for purposes of this study, this is the definition I will use. Because that's a pretty ethereal concept out there, and you've got to somehow make it a little more concrete. Same thing with intercultural competence. Yeah, what that is in your presentation, I hope I didn't overlook it, but it never solidified.
Okay.
So you really need to make those more concrete
Okay.
for the benefit of your reader.
Thank you. Okay, excellent.
Is that it? All right, so there's a couple of things that I put notes in here on that you're going to see. I'm not going to go through everything, but I do have a couple of questions for you. First of all, let's see, let me get to it. I like the wording on the hypotheses better now. It looks much better. So let's talk about your instrumentation. The one instrument, the cultural competence scale, you said that the reliability and validity for each section is coming in at 0.38 to 0.62.
Those numbers are the correlation between the elements. And so, for example, metacognitive and competence and cognitive competence, they have the 0.62. And so it's just showing that there is some correlation between those 4 components.
Okay, so you've got alpha greater than 0.70 and then your composite reliability, but what about those 4 sections? Are they validated separately? Because you're using them
Correct,
separately.
yes.
I'm going the wrong way.
You're good. Yes, correct. And that is where I can put it out a little bit more clearly.
So do you have the validity for each section?
Yes.
And is it all above what it needs to be?
Can you keep going? Let me see what that.
It should be slide 18 if that helps any.
You're going the wrong way. I think it said it was between point.
Just tell me when to stop.
Okay, keep going.
Well, it says the composite reliability is between 0.80 and 0.84. It says alpha is greater than 0.70, but I'm assuming that's...
Sorry, go back. One slide. You skipped it. Yeah, so my variances were between 0.75 and 1.03. And I can re-look at each particular one.
Okay, yeah, because that's going to look a little bit different for the 4 sections.
Okay.
So you've got to make sure, especially with that multiple regression, that you've got the validity supporting that for each section. Because not every instrument is going to be validated per section.
Gotcha.
Sometimes it's just that overall composite score.
And just write out exactly each section in there. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So another question about that then. You mentioned that you were going to customize the survey.
Correct.
What's that gonna do to the validity?
So when I mean customize the survey, all I mean is in Mind Garden, they allow for me to take another test and put it in. So I'm not changing any wording or any testing. The survey's customized of how it's all put into one link that has everything in
Okay.
it.
So that needs to be really
Okay,
clear,
okay,
because
okay.
I thought you were saying that you were gonna change some
I
of the
see what,
wording,
yes.
which is going to change the
Okay,
validity,
okay.
so just make sure that's super clear
Okay.
there. And like I said, there's some other comments that I put on there that you'll be able to look at, and if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me about it,
Thank you.
alright? Any questions from the class? Crickets chirping.
We're all doing this.
Come on, guys. Okay,
I
Lucy.
think that's- So, were there other instruments that you were looking at, when you decided on these two?
Yes, that is actually an excellent question. There are 10 plus flow scales. So I chose the dispositional flow scale. What that is looking at, again, is that variance. So how frequent are they experiencing flow? Other flow scales look at certain domains. So only in physical activity, or only it's been made to look at performance. This one is how much are they experiencing flow to give the variance.
So to piggyback on that,
Yeah.
in your research and when you chose this instrument, were there definitions that you could utilize to make it?
Yes, and actually I had the very first slide had definitions, but that is not in our actual slide, so I took it out.
Oh.
But yes, it is, in the actual dissertation, we start with all of these definitions, so giving definitions to flow, intercultural competence, but I'll work on making sure that's more clear in the presentation itself. Thank you. Other questions?
Alright,